My name is Elena, and my story begins in a place I never imagined I would belong. A dimly lit bar in the outskirts of New York. Neon lights flickered over the faces of strangers every night as I stood behind the bar, where I worked as a bartender, listening to the sad life stories of those who came here to escape reality. But if you asked me, I was just one of them. A lost soul, trying to survive each day. I never thought I would end up here. In the days of my youth, I dreamed of a different life, a better life. Growing up in a small town on the outskirts of Texas, where everyone knew each other and spoke in half-hearted compliments filled with judgment, I always yearned to escape. I was raised by my mother, the only person I ever trusted in this world, and when she passed away from cancer, I realized I was completely alone. I drifted to New York, hoping to find a new opportunity. But the city wasn't the fairy tale I had imagined. Finding a job at a bar, I took it because it was the only choice I had. People saw me as just another face behind the counter, but that didn't bother me. Love, for me, was a luxury for the fortunate. All I wanted was to make it through each day. And then he walked in, Ethan. He entered the bar one cold winter evening, exuding a calm, confident air that set him apart from the regular patrons. He carried himself with a kind of effortless grace, a magnetism that commanded attention the moment he stepped through the door. I didn't know much about him, only that he was a new regular, a mysterious man from a world that felt galaxies away from mine. And I, standing behind the bar, just a drink server, was the only one he seemed to notice. We started talking. At first, it was just small talk. But after a few weeks, Ethan began coming in daily, and our conversations deepened. He wasn't like any man I'd ever met. He didn't see me as just a bartender, but as a woman, someone real. Ethan made me feel special, like I was more than just a part of this mundane world. He told me about his life, about his successful businesses, and his far-reaching plans. I admired the way he seemed to control everything around him, how he always seemed to know what he wanted and how to get it. He never spoke of his past, and I never asked. We were like two strangers, trying to understand each other in the midst of broken dreams. Soon enough, we started dating. Ethan took me to places I'd never imagined I'd set foot in. Fancy restaurants, glittering high society parties. I felt like I was living someone else's life, the life I had once dreamed of. Every night, when he dropped me off at my apartment, I felt like I was no longer the girl behind the bar, but a part of the glamorous world Ethan brought with him, a small piece of that dazzling life. But slowly, I began to sense something was off in our relationship. Ethan was elusive. He was always busy, and sometimes days would go by without a word from him. His phone would go dead, unreachable, and then suddenly, he would reappear with a charming apology, making me feel like I was just an afterthought in his life. But I loved him, madly, even though deep down, I knew something wasn't right. On the nights when he wasn't by my side, I returned to being just me, a girl working a dead-end job, stuck between nightmares of a bleak future. Loving Ethan felt like holding on to a distant dream, a fleeting illusion amid the harsh reality. But I couldn't let him go. Ethan was everything I had hoped for. He was my escape from the mediocrity of my life. And then things started to change. There were more nights Ethan didn't show up. Broken promises, unexplained absences. I told myself it was just work, that he was too busy, but in my heart, I knew something had shifted. I began noticing strange messages on his phone when he carelessly left it unlocked. But I refused to ask, refused to doubt, because I was afraid that if I did, I would lose him forever. Until one night, Ethan didn't come. I sat behind the bar, waiting for him as usual, but there was no text, no explanation. My heart sank, a quiet dread building inside me. Was I just a game to him, or was there something I had missed? Some secret he had never told me? It was in that moment I realized I was just a puppet in Ethan's hands. But love had blinded me, and I was still too weak to face the truth. Weeks passed, and things with Ethan grew even more complicated. His absences became more frequent, and the cold silence in my apartment felt suffocating. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that I was losing him little by little. But then, something happened that changed everything. I found out I was pregnant. The moment the test turned positive, I was filled with a rush of emotions, fear, shock, and a strange sense of hope. Maybe this was it. I thought. Maybe this was the way to bring us closer, to solidify the love we had. I pictured telling Ethan, imagining how he would react, how we would plan our future together. A baby could be the anchor that tied us together. But reality rarely matches the dreams we create for ourselves. When I finally worked up the courage to tell him, it wasn't the tender, loving moment I had envisioned. I chose a quiet evening, hoping to catch him in one of his rare calm moods. We sat in my apartment, the city lights flickering through the windows as I softly whispered, "Ethan, I'm pregnant." For a moment, time seemed to stop. He stared at me, his expression frozen, unreadable. I held my breath, waiting for the smile, the embrace, the relief that never came. Instead, his face darkened, his brows furrowed, and he turned away. "Elena," he said, his voice cold and detached. "This can't happen." I blinked, not fully understanding what he meant. "What do you mean?" "Ethan, he cut me off. "You can't keep it." His words hit me like a slap. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I thought he might have been shocked, unprepared, but this wasn't the reaction I expected. He was calm, almost too calm, as if he had already made up his mind before I even told him. "I have a life, a career. This wasn't part of the plan," he continued, his voice still cold, as if we were discussing some business deal gone wrong. "You know that." I felt my heart break in that moment. What about us? What about our future? This is our baby, Ethan. How can you just... "I'm not asking you," he said, his tone sharp. "I'm telling you, get rid of it." I couldn't breathe. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. The man I had loved, the man I had built my hopes around, was standing in front of me, telling me to end the life growing inside of me as if it was nothing more than an inconvenience. I sat there, stunned, while he walked out. I wanted to scream, to beg him to stay, but the words wouldn't come. The door clicked shut, and I was alone, completely, utterly alone. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't focus on anything. I couldn't think straight. All I could feel was the crushing weight of the decision he had placed on me. I had always seen my relationship with Ethan as imperfect, but never had I imagined he would be so heartless, so ruthless. I had to face the reality that Ethan didn't see me or our child as part of his future. I was disposable, and so was the life inside me. I couldn't go through with it. I refused to let him dictate my choice, my body. The thought of getting rid of my baby broke me in ways I couldn't explain, and as much as I wanted to hold on to Ethan, I couldn't do what he asked. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about this tiny life, this fragile heartbeat I had begun to cherish. But I didn't know how to tell him. I was terrified of losing him, even though, deep down, I knew I already had. So I stayed silent. I kept the pregnancy to myself, hoping against hope that Ethan might come around, that maybe he would change his mind, that he would see the baby as a blessing, as something worth fighting for. But as the weeks went by, he became more distant, more detached, and I began to realize that I was fighting a losing battle. Then came the night. I knew I couldn't hide it any longer. Ethan had been gone for several days, and I hadn't heard from him. I called, texted, but there was no response. My heart ached with fear and uncertainty. When he finally showed up at my door, his demeanor was colder than ever. There were no warm greetings, no apologies for his absence. I couldn't wait any longer. I had to confront him, had to tell him that I wasn't going to follow his orders. I didn't do it, I blurted out, standing in front of him with my arms crossed over my chest, my heart racing. He didn't even look surprised. He just stood there, his jaw clenched, his eyes narrowing in frustration. "Elena," he sighed, his tone full of exasperation. "You don't understand. This isn't a choice. You can't keep it." "Yes, it is a choice," I snapped back, anger bubbling up inside me. "And I've made mine." For the first time, I saw something crack in his carefully composed exterior. His face hardened, and his voice dropped to a low, dangerous tone. "If you don't take care of this, we're done. Do you understand? There's no us if you don't fix this." I stood there, frozen in shock. He was giving me an ultimatum, my child or him. My world shattered in that moment, and any illusion I had of who Ethan was crumbled before my eyes. He left again that night, but this time I didn't try to stop him. I was too broken to care. I had thought that love would be enough to save us, but I was wrong. Love couldn't survive the lies, the manipulation, and the cruelty that Ethan had brought into my life. In the silence that followed, I realized that I wasn't just mourning the loss of him. I was mourning the loss of the future I had imagined, the dreams that were never meant to be. Ethan had taken everything from me, my hope, my trust, and now he wanted to take my child. But I wouldn't let him. In the days that followed, I tried to rebuild myself. It wasn't easy. Every time I thought of Ethan, my chest tightened with pain, a reminder of the love that had dissolved into bitterness and betrayal. But as much as it hurt, I knew I had to move forward. I had someone else to think about now, someone far more important than my broken heart. My baby. I quit my job at the bar. The late nights and constant stress weren't good for me or my child, and every corner of that place held memories of Ethan, memories that I wanted to erase. I found a quieter job in a small cafe on the other side of the city. The pay wasn't great, but it was enough to get by. The people there didn't ask questions about my past or my pregnancy, and that was all I could ask for. Still, the weight of everything that had happened with Ethan haunted me. I would see couples walking down the street, hand in hand, and wonder why things couldn't have been different for us. Why he couldn't have been the man I thought he was. Some nights I would lie awake, one hand resting on my growing belly, wondering if I had made a mistake. If I should have fought harder for him, for us. But deep down, I knew that Ethan had made his choice long before I had. Time passed, and the physical changes in my body were undeniable. My belly grew rounder, and with every passing week, I felt more connected to the life growing inside me. This baby was my world now, the only thing keeping me grounded in the storm of emotions swirling around me. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew that I had to be strong, for both of us. And just when I thought I had finally put Ethan behind me, he reappeared, like a ghost from the past, haunting the fragile peace I had built. I was in the cafe, wiping down tables after a long day, when I saw him standing at the door. At first, I thought I was imagining it, that my mind was playing tricks on me. But no, it was him, Ethan, in the flesh, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on me. My heart dropped into my stomach. He hadn't changed at all, still the same confident, handsome man who had once swept me off my feet. But there was something different about him now, something colder, more calculated. He walked toward me with that same commanding presence, as if nothing had ever happened between us, as if he hadn't left me shattered and alone. "Elena," he said smoothly, like he hadn't disappeared for months without a word. "We need to talk." I froze, the air thick with tension. I didn't want to hear anything he had to say, but there was a part of me, maybe the part that had once loved him so deeply, that couldn't just walk away. "What do you want, Ethan?" I asked, my voice steady, though my heart raced with anger and confusion. He glanced down at my stomach, his eyes narrowing slightly as he took in the sight of my pregnant belly. "I see you've made your decision." I bristled at his tone, my hands instinctively resting on my belly, a protective gesture. "Yes, I have." There was a moment of silence between us, thick with unresolved tension and emotions I didn't want to name. Then he spoke again, his voice low, almost too calm. "I want to help," he said, and for a second, I almost believed him. "Almost. Help?" I echoed, disbelief coloring my words. "You didn't want this baby, you made that perfectly clear." He shifted his weight, his expression unreadable. "I know what I said, but things have changed. I've had time to think, and I want to be a part of this. I want to support you." I stared at him, trying to process his words. After all the pain he had caused, after telling me to get rid of our child, now he wanted to swoop back in and play the role of the caring father? I didn't trust him. How could I? "No," I said, shaking my head. "You don't get to come back and pretend like everything's fine. You don't get to fix this now." His eyes darkened, his calm facade beginning to crack. "I'm not pretending, Elena. I'm serious. I've made mistakes, but I want to make things right." "Make things right?" I repeated, my voice rising with disbelief. "You told me to kill our child, Ethan. You abandoned me when I needed you the most, and now you expect me to believe that you've changed?" He flinched, just barely, but I saw it. His mask was slipping. The smooth, confident Ethan I had fallen for was gone, replaced by someone else, someone desperate. "I had my reasons," he said, his voice tight. "Things were complicated back then." "They're still complicated," I shot back. "But you made your choice, and I made mine. I'm going to raise this baby without you." He took a step closer, his eyes boring into mine. You don't know what you're saying, Elena. This baby changes everything. I could feel my pulse quicken, my throat tightening with a mixture of fear and defiance. It changes nothing. You've lost the right to be a part of this. For a moment, he just stood there, his jaw clenched, his eyes dark with something I couldn't quite place. Anger? Regret? I wasn't sure. But then, without another word, he turned and left, the door slamming shut behind him. I stood there, my heart pounding in my chest, trying to make sense of what had just happened. He was back, but not in the way I had imagined. And now I was left with more questions than answers. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Ethan's sudden reappearance, his strange insistence on being involved, it didn't sit right with me. There was something he wasn't telling me, something lurking beneath the surface of his words. And deep down, I knew this wasn't over. I tried to put Ethan's sudden reappearance behind me, but it wasn't that simple. As much as I wanted to forget him and focus on my baby, his presence loomed like a shadow over every corner of my life. Days passed, and I kept expecting him to show up again, to press me with more apologies or try to charm his way back into my life. But he didn't. Instead, things went eerily quiet. And then something happened that made my blood run cold. I was at home one evening, curled up on the couch with a cup of tea, trying to unwind after a long day at the cafe. My phone buzzed with a notification, and when I picked it up, my heart dropped. It was a message from an unknown number, but the words were all too familiar. You can't hide this forever, I'll be watching. A chill ran down my spine. I reread the message, hoping it was just some sick prank, but deep down, I knew who it was from. Ethan. He was playing mind games, trying to keep me on edge. My pulse quickened as paranoia crept in. Was he really watching me? Had he been following me this whole time? I didn't know what to do. I considered calling the police, but what would I say? That my ex was sending cryptic messages? They'd probably dismiss it as a minor dispute. Besides, Ethan had connections, resources that I couldn't even begin to understand. He could make things disappear as easily as he could make them appear. But I wasn't going to let him intimidate me. I had been through too much to let him control me again. I blocked the number and tried to push the fear out of my mind. Yet, no matter how hard I tried, the unease lingered. I knew that Ethan wouldn't give up so easily. The days dragged on, and my pregnancy continued to progress. The baby was my only source of light in this dark chapter of my life. Feeling those little kicks, the soft flutters inside me, it was a reminder that I had something precious, something worth fighting for. But then, things started to spiral out of control. One night, I was working late at the cafe, cleaning up after the dinner rush, when a man came in. He wasn't a regular, and there was something unsettling about the way he lingered by the door, his eyes scanning the room as if he was looking for someone. I kept my distance, focusing on wiping down tables, but I could feel his eyes on me. Eventually, he approached the counter. Elena, right? My heart skipped a beat. How did he know my name? Who's asking? I replied, keeping my tone neutral, though my nerves were on high alert. He smiled, but it wasn't friendly. I'm a friend of Ethan's. The moment he said Ethan's name, my stomach churned. I should have known. This wasn't just a random stranger. He was sent here. What do you want? I asked, my voice wavering slightly. The man's smile widened, but his eyes remained cold. Ethan wants to make sure you're taken care of. He's worried about you, about the baby. I felt a surge of anger. Worried? Is that why he's been sending me threats? The man's expression didn't change. He shrugged casually, as if what I had said didn't matter. Ethan's a powerful man. It would be smart of you to listen to him. I took a step back, my hands trembling. I'm not scared of him, and I'm not scared of you. The man chuckled, a low, sinister sound that made my skin crawl. You should be. Things could get complicated for you if you don't cooperate. My heart raced as fear mixed with fury. I had dealt with enough of Ethan's manipulation, enough of his threats. I wasn't going to let him push me around anymore. Tell Ethan to stay out of my life, I said through clenched teeth. I don't need his help, and I don't want anything from him. The man's smile faded, and he leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. You don't get to make the rules, Elena. Ethan does, and if you don't fall in line, you're going to regret it. With that, he turned and walked out, leaving me standing there, my hands shaking and my mind racing. I didn't know what to do. Ethan wasn't just a man with a broken heart. He was dangerous. And now, it was clear he wasn't going to let me go easily. The following weeks were a blur of anxiety and fear. Every time I stepped outside, I felt like someone was watching me. I started looking over my shoulder, checking if anyone was following me. My once quiet life had become a nightmare, and I was constantly on edge, waiting for the next shoe to drop. Then one night, the nightmare took a darker turn. It was late, and I was walking home from the cafe. The streets were quiet, the only sound being the distant hum of traffic. I had just turned the corner onto my street when I heard footsteps behind me. At first, I thought it was just another pedestrian, but as the footsteps grew louder and quicker, my heart began to race. I glanced over my shoulder, and my blood ran cold. A man was following me, tall, broad, and moving with purpose. I didn't recognize him, but I knew instinctively that he wasn't there by accident. I quickened my pace, my breath coming in shallow gasps as panic set in. The man sped up as well, and I knew I had to do something. I couldn't let him catch up to me. I darted into an alleyway, hoping to lose him in the narrow maze of side streets. My pulse pounded in my ears as I sprinted through the dark, my mind racing with fear. But as I turned another corner, I found myself at a dead end. Trapped. I pressed my back against the cold brick wall, my chest heaving as the man's footsteps echoed closer. This was it. He was going to catch me, and I had no idea what he would do. My hand instinctively went to my stomach, a protective gesture for the life growing inside me. Then, just as the man appeared at the mouth of the alley, a car screeched to a halt behind him. A door swung open, and before I could fully process what was happening, someone shouted, "Get in!" It was a woman's voice, strong, commanding. Without thinking, I ran toward the car, throwing myself into the passenger seat. The woman hit the gas, and we sped off into the night, leaving the man behind in the alleyway. I was shaking. My breath ragged as I turned to look at my savior. She was a striking woman, her dark hair pulled back into a tight ponytail, her eyes sharp and focused. "You're lucky I was following you," she said, glancing at me briefly before returning her attention to the road. "Pooh? Who are you?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she drove for a few more minutes, making several sharp turns until we were well away from the alley and whoever had been following me. Finally, she pulled into a quiet parking lot and turned off the engine. She looked at me, her expression unreadable. "My name's Claire," she said. "I've been keeping an eye on you. We have a mutual interest, Ethan." The car was silent except for the faint hum of the engine cooling down. Claire's sharp eyes locked onto mine, as if she were trying to assess how much I could handle. My heart was still racing from the chase, and my thoughts were a blur. Who was this woman? How did she know Ethan? And why had she saved me? "I don't understand," I finally said, my voice trembling. "Why are you helping me? What's your connection to Ethan?" Claire sighed, her gaze shifting toward the darkened street ahead. For a moment she seemed lost in thought, as if trying to decide how much to reveal. Then she spoke. Her voice low but steady. "I'm not just helping you, Elena. I'm here because Ethan's not who you think he is. He's far more dangerous than you realize." A chill ran down my spine. I had already seen glimpses of Ethan's darker side, but Claire's words hinted at something deeper, something more sinister than I had imagined. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Claire leaned back in her seat, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Ethan comes from a powerful family, a family that controls more than just money. They manipulate people, destroy lives. His father, in particular, is ruthless. I've been investigating them for years, trying to expose their corruption, but Ethan, he's been one of my biggest obstacles." Her words sent a jolt of fear through me. Ethan's charm and confidence had always seemed effortless, but now I understood why. He wasn't just a man with resources, he was part of something far more dangerous. And I had been pulled into the middle of it without even realizing. "So why me?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Why is he so fixated on me?" Claire's expression softened, but only slightly. "You were never supposed to matter, Elena. You were just a distraction for him, a way to pass the time. But then you got pregnant, and that changed everything. Now you're a liability." My hand instinctively went to my belly. I had always known that Ethan's change of heart wasn't genuine, but hearing Claire confirm it made the reality even harsher. I had been nothing more than a game to him, and now my baby was just another pawn in his twisted power struggle. Claire continued, her voice hardening. He doesn't want you to keep the baby because he knows it could complicate things for his family. If word got out, it would ruin his reputation, and his father won't allow that. The weight of her words settled heavily on my chest. Ethan's insistence on me getting rid of the baby hadn't been about fear or uncertainty. It had been about control, about keeping his life clean and polished while destroying mine in the process. I felt sick. So what do I do now? I asked, tears threatening to spill over. I can't just run. He'll find me. He already has. Claire nodded, her expression grim. You're right. Running isn't an option. But there is something you can do. You need to take him down from the inside. I blinked, confused. What are you talking about? How could I possibly do that? Claire's eyes gleamed with a determination I hadn't seen before. Ethan's father has enemies, many of them, and some of them are more than willing to help take him down. But we need leverage. We need proof of their illegal dealings, their dirty secrets, and Ethan is the key to getting that proof. I shook my head, my heart pounding. I don't know anything about that. I'm just trying to survive. Claire leaned forward, her gaze intense. You have more power than you think, Elena. Ethan trusts you, even if only a little. He thinks he can manipulate you, keep you under his control. But you can use that against him. I hesitated, the weight of her words sinking in. Could I really do this? Could I become part of a plan to destroy Ethan and his family? The very thought filled me with dread. But at the same time, I knew that I couldn't keep living in fear. I couldn't let Ethan continue to control me. What do I need to do? I asked, my voice steadier now. Claire smiled faintly, but there was no warmth in it. We need to get close to him again. Gain his trust. Once you're back in his life, you'll have access to the things we need. Documents, emails, anything that could expose his father's empire. It won't be easy, and it will be dangerous, but it's the only way to end this. I swallowed hard, the enormity of the task ahead of me settling in. But as terrifying as it was, I knew Claire was right. Ethan wouldn't stop until he had what he wanted, and I couldn't keep running forever. If I wanted to protect myself and my baby, I had to fight back. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of careful planning. Claire helped me craft a plan, and slowly, I began to let Ethan back into my life. It was harder than I had imagined, pretending to forgive him, pretending to care. But I knew that I had to play the part if I was going to survive. To my surprise, Ethan fell for it. He seemed to believe that I had finally come around, that I was willing to let him be a part of the baby's life. We started meeting regularly, and I let him think that I was warming up to the idea of us being a family. Every smile, every touch, was calculated. It was all part of the game. And as I got closer to him, I began to see the cracks in his facade. Ethan wasn't as confident as he appeared. Beneath the surface, he was paranoid, always looking over his shoulder, always on edge. He trusted no one, not even his own family. One evening, after months of playing this dangerous game, I found what I had been looking for. Ethan had left his laptop open while he took a call in the other room. I seized the opportunity, scrolling through his files until I found an email chain that detailed his father's illegal dealings, money laundering, bribery, and worse. It was the proof Claire had been waiting for. But that wasn't the only thing I found. As I clicked through the files, I stumbled upon something that made my blood run cold. Plans to silence me. Ethan had been working with his father's associates to ensure that once the baby was born, I would disappear. They had planned everything, from where I would be taken to how they would cover it up. I was nothing more than a loose end to them. I sat there, staring at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. This was it. This was the moment I had been dreading, the moment when I realized just how far Ethan was willing to go to protect his family's empire. But I wasn't going to let him win. The next day, I confronted Ethan. We met in a secluded park, far away from prying eyes. As we sat on a bench, the tension between us was palpable. I know everything, I said, my voice cold. Ethan froze, his eyes narrowing. What are you talking about? I know about the emails. I know about your father's crimes, and I know about your plan to get rid of me once the baby is born." His expression darkened, but he tried to play it off. "Elena, you're being paranoid. I would never." "Stop lying," I snapped, my voice sharp. "I've seen the proof, Ethan. I know what you've been planning, and I'm not scared of you anymore." For a moment, he just stared at me, his face unreadable. Then, slowly, a cruel smile spread across his lips. "You think you can take me down? You think anyone would believe you?" I stood up, my heart pounding in my chest. "I don't need anyone to believe me. I have the evidence. And I've already made sure that if anything happens to me, it will go public." His smile faltered, and for the first time I saw fear in his eyes. "You're bluffing," he said, but there was a tremor in his voice. "Try me," I said, my voice steady. "I'm not the same girl you lied to, Ethan. You don't control me anymore." And with that, I walked away, leaving Ethan to watch as his world crumbled around him.